Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel.
Distinguished Rabbi, friends and heads of organizations, representatives of the Council of the City of Toronto, thank you very much for the lovely pin which says much. I shall cherish it. Friends, on one of the TV interviews today, I was told that a very important commission went to Israel, went to the Middle East, and came back with a report. And one of its items was that the State of Israel has a right to exist. And I'm sure that the gentleman who interviewed me was rather taken aback when I was not impressed. The idea that there are people in this world today who take it upon themselves and wish, I suppose, to be taken seriously by others, sit in judgment whether the one and only one country in the world has it a right to exist or has it not. The greatest thing that has happened in this last decade, the greatest accomplishment of the United Nations, is that during the life of the United Nations, and more specifically in the last 10 or 15 years, so many peoples of the world, very few large ones, very many small ones, have stepped into their own and have become free and sovereign states. I used to come to the United Nations every year, and there was always a day of joy for me, and I'm sure for many, when little countries stepped into membership of what is called the family of nations. Among them were people, 300,000, 500,000. Every one of them had a right to aspire to and to achieve their independence, their sovereignty, to be masters of their own destiny. Have I heard during these years that any commission, no matter how important, no matter what institutions they represent, would take it upon themselves to go and come back with this astounding decision? One of the 127 countries of the United Nations has a right to exist. Somehow it is possible to question and then either to give us the right to exist, and some have gone and come and said we have no right to exist. The only country in the world, the only people in the world, over whose heads some believe there is still a question mark, is Israel. We live in a world that is supposed to be a free world. We live in a world where all men, decent men and women, would not dare question the desire, the ambition, and the struggle for freedom and independence of any people. But we, not newcomers into human society, we were not born yesterday, And may I say, without others taking it amiss, this people happens to have contributed somewhat to civilization. It's not only on the books, it's on every rock in the country. One is not safe in trying to build a foundation for his home without striking something, and something written on it, that reminds one of thousands of years. This people, just because our fate has been twice before in our history, when our land was occupied, the lands of many nations throughout the ages have been occupied by foreign rule, but the people remained in the land, and therefore it was simpler. They hoped, they struggled, they believed, they dreamt, and finally the foreign power was thrown out, and they became independent. As so many countries that are now newcomers into the United Nations. Our fate was more tragic even than that. Twice before in our history, when our country was occupied by foreign powers, we were not allowed to remain in the land. We were dispersed. How we fared in our dispersion, how we were treated for almost 2,000 years among the peoples of the world, all that is written down, is known, written down not always with ink, most of the time with tears and blood. This is our history. We are the generation that the most brutal power that ever stood up in the civilized world, did not only question the right of our sovereign existence, but questioned whether any one of us individually, just because he has sinned, he is a Jew, must go. They questioned, and they answered, and they tried. They didn't succeed 100%. Only 1/3 of the Jewish people was sent to the gas chambers, and 2/3 remained. And I suppose if we had spent the rest of our lives weeping over those that are no more, writing about what has happened to us, absorbing the pity from all the world, nobody would have questioned whether we have a right to weep. But it just happened that this people never gave up. Logical, rational, I don't know. But the fact is that we have never given up. And the fact is that after the greatest of all tragedies that has happened to us, when I say happened to us, happened to the world. No world can go on about its business when 1/3 of the Jewish people is sent to the gas chambers. Everybody remembers it, whether they want to or not. It has left a mark everywhere. And after that, the long dream of the return has taken place. Not after that. Decades and decades ago, young men and women were not satisfied merely with dreaming and hoping and weeping. They went and laid the foundation so that after Hitler, there was something in the land. What did we acquire in 1947 through the United Nations? A little tiny strip of land. But one great thing. When people ask us, how is it that we accepted that partition. If there are some of you that remember the original map, with an internationalized Jerusalem, a Jewish state, and Jerusalem internationalized, and not a part of it. And we said yes. We closed our eyes, and we saw 3 years after the war, after Hitler was no more, and the free world was victorious. And 3 years after the war, there were 300,000 men, women, and children behind barbed wires in Cyprus, in the camps in Europe. We closed our eyes, we saw them, and we said yes, because by that we got the key to the port of Haifa. And no more illegal immigrants, and no more boats were going to be driven away, and no more Jews will have to steal into the night to try and come into their homeland. And no young people would have to go like thieves in the night down to the Negev and up to the Galil to put up their little tents and a wire around them and call it a Jewish settlement, because by law it was forbidden. And we're over 20 years old, and we refuse to give up. And we had all the odds against us in 48, in 56, in 67. Thank God we never asked anybody to come and help us. We never asked for one single soldier from any army. All the blood that was shed for our being was that of our sons and daughters. And every time when our Arab neighbors wanted to throw us into the sea, and they did not succeed, people looked at us as though we are guilty of something. Because it was said that Nasser could not possibly make peace with Israel because he was humiliated and frustrated. And we are to blame. 3 times he fought us, 3 times he failed, and therefore is humiliated and frustrated. And what kind of a people are we? Hard-hearted, stubborn. There is no sign of our wanting to be accommodating. Nasser wanted to destroy us, and we didn't let him. And he was humiliated and frustrated, and no peace with Israel for over 20 years. And between the wars, no peace. No peace on the borders. The Syrians on the Golan Heights shooting at our agricultural settlements below. The Egyptians in the Gaza Strip causing the young mothers in the kibbutzim around the Gaza Strip to raise their children underground. The same as the kibbutzim and moshavim and the new towns of Beit Shan and Kiryat Shmona on the Lebanese border, Syrian border, the Jordanian border. After the 6-Day War, the children are growing up underground. There are children that don't know what it means to sleep in a normal bed in a room. It's over 3.5 years now. Those of 2 years and 3 years old, those of 4 and 5 have forgotten that it is possible to sleep in a room above ground. This is their home. They spend a good part of the day when there is shelling, also a good part of the day in the air shelters. There's the kindergarten, there's the classroom, there's where they play. But not one single village, not one single kibbutz or moshav has been evacuated during these 3.5 years and during the war before that. Are we heroes? We're not heroes, but this is ours. We don't run away from it. This is what we have built, and this we must preserve. When somebody comes and tells us now, he weighs the matter. Have we a right to exist, or have we not? Let him go to one of those air shelters and speak to the 5- and 6-year-olds and put the question to them. Or let him come to them with this great message that he has. Let him go into these shelters and tell the children, dear children, I've come to tell you, I've weighed the matter, you have a right to exist. Or maybe to go down to the Suez Canal, or the Golan Heights, or in the Jordan Valley, and call the boys and girls of 18 and 19 and 20, these children who carry the burden of the survival of a people, not only the survival of Israel. They are convinced, as I am, I'm sure as many of you are, all of you. The survival of Israel is not the survival of 2.5 million Jews. The survival of Israel is a matter, are we as a people going to survive in the world? Not physically. Not a question of physical existence. What's going to happen to our generations, God forbid, if Israel is not here? And these youngsters on the battlefield, in the Sinai and the Golan Heights, while these young boys were going up with their tanks daytime, crawling up to the Golan Heights, targets for all the bullets, more than at any other time, did they feel their complete identification with the Jewish people all over the world. Something that we thought at times maybe they were not conscious of. These are Sabras, 2nd, 3rd generation born in Israel. Yes, difficulties, struggles, wars, but straight Israelis. And we thought, do they realize that there is a connection? It's not only the few of us that are there. And anyone that has heard them, anyone that has read what they have written, what they have said, they have found themselves as part of you, and you as part of us. When they were faced with Russian tanks and Russian guns in the Sinai and on the Golan Heights, when they were fighting for Jerusalem, when so many of them fell in the Battle of Jerusalem, because the orders were that despite the fact that the Jordanians put up their guns on all holy places, Christian holy places, Jewish holy places they destroyed before, therefore we must not use artillery. And many of our boys fell in that terrible battle for Jerusalem because of that order. Because we have a peculiar idea. We think that if our holy places are holy to us, then Christian holy places are holy to Christians, and Muslim holy places are holy to Muslims. And the order was to safeguard it, to protect it, and even if we had to pay with the lives of many of the boys. When they found themselves against these great odds, we weren't fighting only the Arabs. My friends, we were fighting all that Russia possessed in the best of arms, in the most modern, in fantastic quantities. As we are facing today, not only the Egyptians, not only the Syrians, The missiles in the Suez Canal zone on the other side of the canal are not Egyptian-made missiles, nor are they all manned by Egyptians. Without the Russians bringing in the missiles, without thousands of Russians in that narrow strip in the canal zone, thousands of them manning these missiles, directing the work of the Egyptians, they wouldn't have been there. If the close to 20,000 Russians weren't in Egypt today, if they hadn't immediately after the Six-Day War airlifted again tanks and guns and planes, better and more modern, I'm convinced we would have had peace today. I say if it hadn't been for the Russians, we wouldn't have had the Six-Day War. And the world looks upon us, and over again we are asked, why don't you negotiate? Why don't you just conveniently step back to the 1967 borders, as though in 1967 we were in some other borders, as though the war that broke out in 1967 broke out because we were not in the 1967 borders. That's exactly where we were. Why are the borders of 1967 holier today than they were in 67? Why the war? What was the purpose of that war? To keep us on the borders of 1967? The purpose of that war was one and one only. Far beyond the 1967 borders. The only border that was recognized by Egypt and Syria and their Russian friends was the Mediterranean, and we on the other side. And we did not cooperate. And we fought back, a small people with great odds against us. No comparison in numbers of men, no comparison in numbers of planes and tanks. But the spirit of the people, not only of the boys and girls in the army, but the men and women at home, in the streets, in the agricultural settlements, in the north, in the south, all over. The spirit that we have no alternative. We must win. What we are trying to tell our neighbors and the entire world after the Six-Day War, we've won 67, 56, 48, but we have taken an oath not to do anything now which will pave the way for a new victory in war. We are just not prepared to raise generation after generation. First we, then our sons, now our grandchildren. We refuse to accept this fate, that this is the fate of future generations in Israel. When there is a war, we fight it, we pay in the lives of our dear ones, we are victorious, we make some kind of peace, or we step back without making peace. UN observers, UN emergency force, all kinds of solutions except one. Simple negotiations with our neighbors and a signed peace agreement with solemn undertakings and security is not by the UN, nor by UN observers, nor by the big powers that are really big, or those that still think that they are big. The only security that we have known is the people of Israel. The only reason that Israel is here, despite these wars, despite the odds against us, we are here, is not because somebody has given us security. Three big powers in 1950 notified us, they didn't ask, that they guarantee the safety and the borders of all states in the Middle East, including Israel. I must say, we didn't get up every morning and say, well, we have nothing to worry about. The three powers have guaranteed us our safety. Do you know when they announced that it isn't valid anymore? Just a few days before the Six-Day War. The only guarantee is borders which are defensible. Borders that we will consider secure. Borders negotiated between us and our neighbors. Agreed borders between us and our neighbors. Borders that do not give a natural advantage to our neighbors. Borders that in themselves must be a deterrent. That when our neighbors again someday will want to attack us, they'll think twice. Believe me, if we are on the Golan Heights, Syria will think many, many times whether to attack us. If we are down below and they are on the heights, they don't have to think a lot. They put up guns and shoot. These are the things that we want to avoid. It's not true, it's simply not true that we are out for territory. Expansion, territorial expansion. As though we don't have enough sand of our own. But we refuse to go back exactly to the place where we were attacked. And we refuse to accept something that is instead of peace. And when we decided to accept the American initiative and to negotiate not directly, although we are still convinced that the only way really to negotiate is directly with our neighbors, those that fought each other, they are the ones that must make peace with each other. But we agreed to talk through Dr. Yaring, being convinced that you don't sign a peace agreement with somebody through somebody, by proxy. You don't carry on a war by proxy, and you don't make a peace agreement by proxy. But we thought, we'll begin. Eventually, we will meet. And part of that proposal of the United States government was ceasefire, and we accepted. We never agreed to a limited ceasefire, because we always said a limited ceasefire means that if the ceasefire is 90 days, then on the 91st day, they can begin to shoot, and that's legal, so to say. But when in this ceasefire proposal, there was a very important item, standstill, so that no party, neither we nor the Egyptians, could do anything during this 3-month period of ceasefire that would improve the strategic positions. And we knew what we feared. Therefore, we asked detailed questions. What about moving of missiles? What about new sites? What about the construction of new sites? What about filling the sites that are there? And we got clear, distinct answers on all of these questions. No moving of missiles, no new construction, no new sites. We didn't ask the United States government whether they would move in missiles. The United States government was the go-between. And they went to Egypt, and they asked Moscow. And Moscow agreed, and Egypt agreed. With all my great respect for the foreign minister of the Soviet Union, when Mr. Gromyko says we were not a partner to this agreement, and Mr. Rogers says the ambassador of the Soviet Union told me after he got in touch with his government that you agree, I believe Mr. Rogers. And within a few hours, after the agreement was signed, after the ceasefire went into effect, the missiles started moving. And by this time, the entire area is filled up with missiles. SAM 2 and SAM 2 improved, and SAM 3, and it'll interest you to know that we are privileged. The SAM 3s are not given to everybody, only to East Germany and to Egypt. That's out of respect to us and to our army, to our Air Force. And the most natural reaction on our part was, how can we possibly sit down and negotiate through Dr. Yaring with the Egyptians? What are we going to negotiate about? We're going to negotiate how do we come to a peace agreement. We're going to negotiate where the secure border should be. And we wanted, and we said, and our policy is, agreed secure borders. And supposing somewhere, and it's natural, especially with Egypt, that somewhere we will say, this is the secure border, and everything that is beyond the secure border is yours. And we march out, and Egypt marches in. What will we get in return except a promise, a signature on the part of Egypt? No war, no threat of war, no belligerency, no attacking us, free shipping through the Suez Canal, all these things we've already had before. But we are prepared to try again. Maybe they also have learned a lesson. But in Egypt, with their great brother, having promised to the United States and to us that certain things will be observed, certain things will not be done, and no sooner does the ceasefire go into effect when they immediately begin violating their promise, violating their undertaking, what sense is there to negotiate? And now people turn around to us exactly as the talk of the humiliation because the Arabs didn't win the war, and they say, yes, but it's a question of face-saving now. How can you really humiliate them? Poor things. They cheated. How can you tell them that they cheated? And if you tell them that they cheated, how can you tell them that you must correct the situation? You must live up to your promise, to your agreement. Take them back, and then we'll negotiate. And when we are told, of course you are right, and of course they cheated, but face-saving. And we say face-saving is very important. Life-saving is more important. And when good people say to us, you are right, your planes, more of them will come down than without the missiles, if and when shooting is resumed. And we will not be the ones to resume it. But if the Egyptians begin again, and more planes will come down, of course you are entitled for rectification. Rectification in this instance means you'll get more planes. Very nice. It only happens that in the planes are our sons. Nobody can rectify that. And we refuse to go into a situation. We have no right to go into a situation that endangers the life of our sons more than I almost said is natural. They're carrying a big burden. Most heartbreaking thing in the world. My friends, you received me tonight as a Prime Minister. I often, late at night, when all the papers have been read, cables, reports, and I sit alone in my study, I ask myself, by what zchut? Why I? Then I answer to myself, not zchut, not privilege of honor. It's a great honor to be Prime Minister of the State of Israel. But my friends, the burden, the heartache, the necessity of making decisions sometimes when boys are sent out on missions, dangerous missions, they're sitting near the telephone all night long and waiting for reports. That magic word, when planes went over to the other side, and that magic word, they came back safely. All of them. But that is not always the report. There are different reports. Not all came back safely. Some remain prisoners on the other side. And some are dead. And some are wounded. And it doesn't help, my friends, when you go to the hospital and you visit these wounded ones and you see them within a heroism that one cannot understand. Our doctors, our surgeons don't understand it. How is it not a word, not a sigh out of them, not a complaint? You think this helps? On the contrary, it's more difficult. It's more heartbreaking. If they would only complain. These youngsters are carrying a terrible burden. And it is our business and it is our duty not to make it heavier by one hair. It is our duty to see, as much as within our power, that this time is the end of all wars. And my friends, this is the only thing that we are struggling for. Not more sand, not more rocks, not more territory, but for security and the assurance that we at least have done everything within our power. That we have not done the same as in 1957, when we stepped right back to the place from which we came, and actually it paved the war for 1967. It's true, 10 years have passed. One more generation that has reached the age of 18, 19, 20, again in war. We are stubborn, so it is said. And it is said that we're not flexible. I plead guilty. We are stubborn. We are not flexible. We're terribly stubborn. We want peace. We don't want anything from our neighbors. Just peace. And my friends, we're not always understood. This is a British understatement. We're not always applauded. And when things get pretty difficult, you have to explain yourself so much. You have to give so many excuses why you have a right to exist. You have to give so many excuses why don't you let Arafat choose. Free choice, it is said in the United Nations. So you let Arafat choose. Is it convenient for him to destroy us from the Jordanian side of the border? Or does he think that it'll be easier for him to do it if, according to free choice, he leads his Fatah army across the border and into Israel? And we are stubborn. And we say no country in the world gives free choice to people to come in who want to destroy it. There were fifth columns in many countries, but it wasn't done by the free choice of the people that fifth columns were created. 47, they could have accepted the resolution of 47. They could have set up another Arab state in the Western Bank and the Gaza Strip. They didn't do it, they fought us. And Abdullah, without the United Nations, merely annexed the Western Bank. And he and afterwards Hussein gave Jordanian citizenship to hundreds of thousands of the former Palestinians who are today Jordanian citizens. If they want Jordan to be called Palestine, we have nothing against it. They don't have to ask our permission or our consent. One thing must be clear. Between the Mediterranean and the Iraqi border, there is room for two states, and two states only. An Arab state and a Jewish state. And I say when things become difficult, there are moments of sorrow and so on, every one of us and I think of you. Too much explanation we don't have to give you. Too much apologizing to you why we are. You're not frustrated. You're not humiliated. You rather like the idea that we weren't thrown into the sea. You are with us. You have been with us. And we come and tell you frankly, the struggle is still going on. As far as we are concerned, there shouldn't have been a war. And if there was a war, there could have been peace easily. But it doesn't depend upon us. To make war, it's quite sufficient when one party decides and acts. For peace, you need two. We are prepared, depends upon the other side. And until then, we must be strong. We must be well equipped. That is the best deterrent against wars. I think the Arabs will think once and twice and three times, and maybe more, should they really try again? Very interesting. The other day, Sadat, the new president of Egypt, suddenly discovered that not in outlying villages somewhere on the Nile, but in Cairo and in Alexandria, there's a lack of water. And the roads aren't good. And I'm convinced that not everybody is housed. And therefore he set up a commission with a very impressive name, the Commission for the Needs of the Masses. Which means that only the masses probably haven't enough water, maybe some do have enough. This is only a sign of what is happening to the people in Egypt. What is happening to these Arab masses, these tens of millions of people that have known only misery and undernourishment and disease and ignorance for themselves and for their children, and the highest infant mortality. This is what the Arab leaders have given to their people and promised them one thing and one thing only, the glory of destroying others. No passion for building for themselves. No desire for a leader to lead his people to constructive effort so that water is not a luxury and electricity is not a luxury and a house and life for the baby that is born is due to him. No, this is not important. What importance is there of the life of Egyptian children? The killing of Israeli children, this is a great ideal. To this you can lead a nation. And I'm convinced that that cannot go on forever. And maybe now people will have the courage to realize it. And God forbid, maybe even to say so. To express themselves. I've said over and over again, I just refuse to believe that an Arab mother loves her son less than a Jewish mother, that an Arab mother's heart is less broken over the death of her son than that of a Jewish mother. I refuse to believe it. And I can't imagine that generations of mothers in the Arab countries are overfilled with joy that they are sending their sons to one war after another, only not to have them come back. For what? Will one single child in Egypt live longer if Israel is gone, if Israeli children are killed? What kind of ideals have these leaders held up to their people? Because I believe in human nature, because I believe in these mothers and in these sons that don't want to die, because I believe that someday a new generation of leaders will come up before the 100 million Arabs in the world and will lead them on to something decent, constructive, full of joy, ambition to build and not ambition to destroy. Because I believe in that. And I know what we want. I know that there will be peace. And until then, we must be strong so that there will be doubt in the minds of these Arab leaders whether they should attack or not. But strong not only military-wise. We cannot let our society wait. We cannot say to our children, you can't go to school because we are engaged in a war. On September 1st, 850 children marched off to schools, elementary schools and high schools. And tens of thousands of young people are in the universities. And there is development in the country, and there is joy in the country, and there is music in the country, and theater in the country. And life goes on. And we must go on building, and above all, there are Jews coming into the country. 45,000 this year, and over 50,000 we have to prepare for next year. And this means housing. And this means more schools, and more roads, more farms, and more factories. This is how we live. This is how we want to live. And one demand and one demand only. Last year when I was in the United States, over and over again I was asked by people, how long can you take this? I mean, we in Israel. And my answer was, as long as you can. And I'm asking you, friends in Canada, don't give up. Don't become despondent. Don't be pessimistic. Not only you are great, you have great people in Israel, young and old. all we want is you to be with us as long as we can take it. It'll be a long time. And as long as we can take it with heads up, as long as we have the courage of our conviction, as long as we say no, not because it's pleasant, but we dare not say yes because we have weakened. We'll say yes when we think we should. We must say no when we think that we are duty-bound for the welfare of the state and the people to say no. Not only to enemies. The most painful thing is to say no to friends. Sometimes we have to do that too. It's very painful for us to hear sometimes our friends say no to us, when sometimes we feel that they do not understand quite what this is all about. I'm sure their intentions are good of our friends, but they do not always accept our ideas. That's permissible, but it hurts. So therefore, my friends, let us decide, as we stood together in the past, so will we in the future. But we will stand together actively. Whatever has to be done there, I promise we will do it. And some things you have to do here, and I'm sure that you will. And as we have stood together in battle and in difficulties and in hardships, so together we will see the day of peace.
A rare recording of Golda Meir. This is a Listen and Live audio production.